FlashlightTag. Jenny has been missing only 36 hours. We still have a chance to find her, but we need to do it soon. Creases of worry spread across the cop's face as he shouted to the crowd of people who turned out for the search party. His name was Lieutenant Johansson, and he seemed to come right out of Central Casting, looking the part to a T. Big, burly, and a strong jaw to complete the mold. The only flaw in his demeanor was a hint of nervousness in his tone. Maybe he had kids too. Jenny Vallon went missing from the backyard of her grandparents' house on Friday night while chasing fireflies with a friend. The grandparents' backyard backed into the Shelton State Forest that surrounded the small town just outside the city where I lived. It consisted of over 33,000 acres and was filled with pines and every other native tree in the area. I was at the back of the crowd, listening intently. 30 people had turned out for the search party. Each one of them had a grim look on their face. Jenny was in my kid's second grade class, and I think it was the fear that every parent harbored deep down that had me there. The black hole of terror that someone would take your kid or they would go missing, never to be found. We need you to break up into teams of 2s or 3s and spread out, but not too far, Johansson said. These woods are big and we have a lot of ground to cover, but we don't need anyone getting lost. His comment was followed by that awkward moment where strangers had to decide who to team up with. I turned to my right, and there was a woman who looked to be about my age, but was a little younger, 27 or 28. She had brown curly hair that wrapped around her face and a runner's body, thin with a layer of sinewy muscle on her legs. "Hey," I said to her, "you want to team up?" She looked at me, and for a moment, I felt like I was being evaluated, like being on a job interview. Then she stuck out a hand and said, "Oh, sure, my name's Lauren." When I went to shake her hand, I discovered that she had a firm grip. "I'm Bill Gibson." "How do you know Jenny?" "Oh, my daughter's in her class at Kennedy." "She's my cousin's kid. My apartment just happens to be down the street from their house. I didn't have that much contact with her, but she's..." Her voice caught for a moment, but she forged ahead. "I like her a lot. My cousin, not so much, but Jenny's special. This is just awful. She seems like a good kid." At 7, they all seemed innocent. There was none of that teenage rebelliousness to deal with, and they still weren't embarrassed to be seen with their parents. At least that's how it was with my kid, Samantha, even if she was a child of divorce. "Took her to the zoo this summer," Lauren said. "She had a blast." Something in her voice made it sound like Jenny might never have fun again, and it caused my soul to ache. I felt a light tap on my shoulder and turned around to see a bushy-haired, bespectacled man looking back at me, only a few inches away. The man had a big grin on his face that seemed ill-suited for the situation. "You guys mind if I tag along with you?" he asked me. I looked over his shoulder and saw that most of the teams had already formed, leaving this guy, the odd man out. Something inside me sighed, but I set that aside and said, "Sure, the more the merrier." He pushed out a beefy hand and said, "My name's Josiah." His palm seemed a little overheated and sweaty. A thick beard, sans mustache, rimmed his chin, making me think of someone from Amish country, and his glasses were too big for his small, close-set eyes. "How do you know Jenny or her family?" "I'm a writer and a blogger. Sci-fi, fantasy, paranormal, and conspiracies." Lauren held him in a puzzled gaze for a few seconds, and he quickly caught up with her question. "Oh yeah, I subbed as a teacher around the school system. I had her class at Kennedy a couple times when her teacher was out with some kind of lady part surgery." Lauren started to open her mouth to say something, but Lieutenant Johansson began to shout out instructions for the search party. She let Josiah off the hook as we all turned in to Johansson's final words. When Johansson finished, Josiah started up again. "Have you guys read my blog?" he asked. "It's called Something's Out There. I've covered it all. 9/11 conspiracy, Loch Ness, Bigfoot, UFOs, the JFK assassination plot." I looked at him blankly. He seemed unbothered by our lack of interest and shifted gears. "If you find any clues or anything, shout out, but don't touch anything. We'll want to bag it to check for any evidence." I cringed at the word evidence. It made things sound so past tense, as if all hope was lost. He finished with these final words, and he delivered them in the most earnest way he could. "Let's find Jenny, guys." Somehow, he made it work. With nightfall imminent, the insects were coming out. Gnats and mosquitoes and obnoxious many flying monstrosities. They all seemed to target me. It didn't help that Josiah babbled on about some local Bigfoot legend, a creature called Hairy Stinky Boo. I mean, who comes up with these names anyway? Despite his incessant chatter, Josiah had been smart enough to bring a flashlight. Lauren had one too, while all I had was my cell phone. I had no idea that the search would take this much time. In other words, I was badly prepared. Josiah's flashlight was one of those bulky ones that looked like it took 20 D-cell batteries. Lauren's was small and sleek, made out of metal. Once dusk hit, they popped them on, forcing me to pair closer to Josiah, since I was lagging behind the swift-footed Lauren. On top of the tinge of hopelessness seeping around the edges of our psyche, there was the physical exertion of hiking in the woods. I wasn't much of a hiker, and it was taking its toll on me. Much of our search took us up and down steep hills. Lauren took it all in without complaint and showed no sign of fatigue, but I was feeling it. Josiah, on the other hand, looked near to collapse, but to his credit, kept it to himself, even though it was obvious. The one thing it didn't do was stop him from talking. He kept up a near monologue since we hit the woods. "Did you guys ever play flashlight tag as a kid?" he asked as he awkwardly stepped over a downed tree in our path. Halfway through the maneuver, he nearly toppled over, but righted himself before going down. "I did," I responded, trying not to show I was winded, but I didn't have much breath to talk. "I must have missed out," Lauren said. She was still in the lead of our trio. "I grew up overseas as an army brat." "Yeah, it was a blast," Josiah said, huffing and puffing around the words. "One kid was it. He had a flashlight and had to count to 50 while all the other kids hid. Then the person who was it went out to find the others. If he caught you in his beam, then you were out." "Sounds like fun," Lauren said. Something in her tone said she was just being polite. We hiked up a small hill and Josiah said, "We're getting pretty far from the other groups. Maybe we should check into regrouping." "What's the matter?" I asked. "You afraid of Harry Stinkerbutt?" "It's Harry Stinky Boo," he replied with a scowl. "And no, I'm not afraid. In fact, I'd love to see him." "Boys, please focus," Lauren said, and I felt somewhat chastened. She paused at the ridge of a hill, more for us than for her. She looked unfazed by our jaunt in the woods, while Josiah was a sweaty mess. I was feeling it, but didn't want to show it. Call it pride or the man code or whatever. "As long as we can see their flashlights, we should be okay," I said to reassure myself as much as him. The longer we were in the woods, the less comfortable I felt. "Did I tell you guys about my blog?" "Yes," both Laura and I said in unison. He was oblivious to our mild annoyance. "I just did a piece last week on strange lights over these woods." "Sounds interesting," I said, but he didn't catch the sarcasm in my tone. "Do you guys believe in UFOs and aliens?" "So you're going there," I replied, stalling, not looking forward to the next descent and the ascent to follow, because the next hill looked like a doozy, as my grandfather would say. "They're real. Roswell, Area 51, the lights over Phoenix. The government's keeping all that stuff under wraps." I barely knew the guy, so I kept my mouth shut. Lauren didn't. "We're here to find a little girl, not to talk about space aliens." I didn't mention anything about the recent disappearances. "What are you talking about now?" Lauren asked, not hiding her annoyance. "This little girl," Lauren cut him off. "Her name is Jenny." "Jenny, yes. 2 or 3 people have disappeared from the area in the past 2 weeks. People disappear all the time, Laura said, clipping out the words. They run away. They escape bad marriages. This is different. My cousin didn't do any of those things. She was taken. I'm sure she was. I mean, this could be like the Jesse Long abduction or like Barney and Betty Hill. They were spirited away by aliens. Could you just zip it, Josiah? We don't need that. We need to keep searching. Josiah looked over his shoulder at the setting sun, the horizon aglow with the last vestiges of orange and yellow, with blue and black threatening to rush in and dampen the light. It's getting late. I don't think they want us wandering around in the dark. I scanned the hills and only saw the dimmest pinpricks of flashlights on a hill a quarter-mile away. I also checked my cell phone and saw that there were no bars. We were beyond the edge of civilization. I can barely see any of the other teams, and I have no signal on my phone. We've gone far afield from everybody else. Is that how it is? Lauren said, placing her hands on her hips. You're worried about the dark when there's a little girl out here, alone and frightened? We don't know she's out in these woods. She could be anywhere. If someone took her, I didn't want to go there. The things that I'd seen and heard in the news about the treatment of kids by pedophiles and molesters played in my head like a terrible slideshow. She's out there, she said, finally, her voice much calmer. And we may be her only hope. Will you help me? Just a little longer, please. How could you say no to that? Only we looked a lot more than a little longer. We went down into a valley and up the next hill, which happened to be a lot taller than it looked. Josiah coaxed Lauren into walking the ridge of the hills for the next half mile to reduce the exertion of the ups and downs. Being able to see across all the hilltops, with the last bits of the sun's rays splashing across them, making them look like a painting, it was something very special. It made me want to get out in nature more often. At least, that's what I thought then. The night creatures came out, both in the skies and on the ground, giving me a general sense of unease. Things buzzed by my ears, and there was a pervasive sound of leaves crinkling as things moved along the ground outside our view. While I had almost made fun of Josiah's Mongo-sized flashlight, it sure came in handy as it provided a lot of candle power for us to navigate on the trail that ran along the ridge. Laura's flashlight seemed dim in comparison. I hope the batteries in that thing last, I said to Josiah. I just stocked them up before coming out. While he had the biggest flashlight, Lauren had the lead. She wasn't too far ahead of us when she stopped suddenly in the middle of the path. There's something down there, she said, while pointing off into the distance. Josiah and I came up alongside her. Where? There, she said, pointing across a large grassy clearing at the base of the hill we were on. I don't see anything. Can we turn back now? I'm telling you, I saw something. That's a long way down the hill, which means it's a long way back up, if there's nothing there at all. Okay. We check this out, then we turn back. You good with that? I guess, Josiah let out, his shoulders sagging. We started down the hill, any excitement or thrill at the search thoroughly gone. Josiah stumbled over root and nearly went down had I not been there to grab him. There was a good chance that had he gone over, he'd have rolled all the way down to the bottom of the hill. That would have been ugly. Thanks, he said. It took nearly 5 minutes to make it to the bottom of the hill. There was a small stand of trees that opened up onto a football size or bigger field of knee-high grass. A gentle breeze wafted the grass back and forth. What I saw is just on the other side, Lauren said, cutting a trail through the grass without looking back. We fell in behind her, making slow but steady progress. Dew off the grass saturated my pants as we made our way across the field. We were about halfway across when Lauren came to an abrupt stop. There! Do you see it? She asked, her voice raising in pitch. I peered off into the woods and saw a glint of something. It was the briefest of glimpses, but something flashed in the woods just across the field. You know, that could be moonlight reflecting off a pool of water, right? It could be, but it's more than we've seen all night, she said, starting forward again. Josiah looked at me as if to say, what the hell? I just shrugged, started after. This would be over soon enough after we found nothing in the woods. Getting back into the tree line was a welcome thing after trudging through the wet grass. We hadn't made it 20 feet before Lauren shouted, "Jenny!" Her voice reverberated for a couple of seconds, but was quickly swallowed by the deep forest. We stood in silence for several seconds, just waiting for something that would never come, a response. The breeze blew dried leaves across our feet, and an owl hooted away in the distance. My feet ached from all the walking, and my body wanted nothing more than to turn around and go home. But it also dreaded the return trip. I was just opening my mouth to say it was time to turn around when a voice came out of the deep woods. A child's voice. "Help me," it said. The voice was weak, but it carried on the moist night air. "Oh my God," Lauren said. "It's Jenny. It's her." She turned around to me, her mouth half open and her eyes wide. I wasn't entirely sure what I'd heard. It seemed so improbable. Then the voice spoke again. "Don't hurt me. Please, don't hurt me." "Jenny!" Lauren screamed, and she was off and running into the trees. I looked over to Josiah, who returned the stare, seeming just as astonished as I was. Then we took off at a run to catch up with Lauren. The terrain was uneven, with roots and rocks making our trek treacherous. Lauren ran ahead of us with total abandon, driven by desperation. She moved like a woman possessed. On the other hand, I lost my balance once and caromed off a tree, but managed to stay upright. Josiah wasn't as fortunate, as he took a nasty spill, his flashlight slipping from his hands, sending out wild beams of light against the canopy of dark leaves above us. I paused long enough to help him get to his feet. He survived with a badly skinned shin, and the light did too. It was taking a beating, I guess, but so was he. By the time he was back on his feet and we were moving again, Lauren was stalled in place, 50 feet ahead of us, next to two very tall oak trees. From reading from her body language, I could tell that she had stopped there because there was no place to go. She had lost her way. Josiah and I made our way forward. We were nearly at Lauren's back when she yelled again, "Jenny! It's Auntie Lauren! I'm here for you!" She paused for a moment, then shouted again, "Please, baby! I'm here to bring you home!" Josiah and I eased in beside her, not saying anything, not wanting to break the spell. "Jenny!" Lauren shouted again. She got nothing but silence in return. "I'm not liking this. Something's not right." "Shut up! I don't want any of that paranormal bullshit." "Why isn't she responding?" "Somebody has her." "Who would bring her all the way out here?" I asked. I also felt very, very vulnerable because we had no weapons. The best I could muster was a cheap ballpoint pen in my shirt pocket. "Who can figure out crazy?" she asked, almost in a whisper. "Jenny!" Josiah jumped at the ferocity of her scream. Again, there was no response. Till there was. A voice came out of the dark, and it said, "Jenny!" Goosebumps ran up my arms and back. The voice had a strange quality to it, almost like a computer was trying to mimic Lauren's voice. Only the name was stretched out in an overlong way. It spoke again, "Jenny!" This time it warbled a little, reminding me of a musician trying to tune their instrument, wavering up and down each time as it said her name. "Jenny, Jenny, Jenny, Jenny." It repeated it over and over again, getting closer and closer to Lauren's voice until it was an exact duplicate. Both Lauren and Josiah splayed their flashlight beams over the trees in front of us, but captured only leaves, trees, and bushes. Then a voice said, "It's Auntie Lauren! I'm here for you!" If goosebumps ran up and down my arms earlier, A fast-moving glacier ran over my entire body after those words were spoken. Josiah sputtered out, "What the hell?" The light came next. It was blinding and intense, white with shades of green, shining at us like a laser beam. It came at us about 8 feet off the ground and was just ahead of us by about 20 feet. The beam was so bright that I could still see it through my eyelids, but after several moments it dimmed enough that I could open my eyes without being blinded. Not that opening my eyes made the picture any better. "Hey, dude, turn off that light," Josiah yelled. The voice came again, like it did when Lauren spoke. "Hey, dude. Hey, dude." He repeated it over and over again, modulating in pitch and tone, until it matched Josiah's voice. "This is definitely creeping me out," Josiah said. "I think we'd better get out of here." "We'd better get out of here," the voice repeated, mimicking Josiah perfectly. Josiah started slowly stepping backward without taking his eyes off the source of the light beam. He made it 5 feet when a loud buzzing sound emanated from the light, and I saw 2 dark forms rise from behind the beam on each side of it. They spread out at about 15 feet, looking like wings, but I wasn't sure, at least not then. I got the full picture when the wings started to beat, buzzing furiously, and the light beam rose up into the canopy of the trees over us. But the light shot down on us, still capturing us in its luminance. I could make out a form behind the light. It was like nothing I'd ever seen in my life. The thing had multiple legs and several arms. There was nothing human about the legs. They looked like insect legs with dangling sharp pincers. Josiah beat me to the punch when he yelled, "Run!" I didn't need to be told, but it looked like Lauren did. She stood transfixed, staring up into the light, caught like a proverbial deer in the headlights. Her mouth was agape, and her eyes were wide. I jumped toward her and grabbed her by one of her arms and yanked her around to look at me. "We have got to get out of here." She nodded her head as if shaking off a punch, then got it and was in motion, heading back through the trees. I fell in behind her, but Josiah was in the lead for the first time that night. No one would call him nimble, but he'd quickly learned how to be fast. His flashlight beam flashed off the trees like a strobe light. The light beam followed us, and the buzzing bored into our heads. I could swear I felt it vibrating the fillings in my teeth. The trees flew by us as we ran, with limbs slapping against our faces and thorn bushes tugging at our pants, but none of us noticed. It's funny the little things you notice when you're running for your lives. Josiah was the first of us to break out of the tree line, sprinting hard into the field. Even over the buzzing, I could hear him panting for breath as he chugged into the tall grass, cutting through it like a tugboat. His flashlight slashed across the tall grass like a scythe as he surged into the field. The light beam passed over Lauren and me, breaking out of the threshold of the trees. Once it was out into the open air, it rose into the sky some, making it well over 75 feet in the air. Lauren and I broke past the trees, and I looked up to see the light beam hovering in the night sky for several seconds. The beam sprang across the grass, making me think of a searchlight. And that's what it really was. Once it locked on Josiah, the figure behind the beam went into motion. It moved like a kamikaze pilot, swooping down toward Josiah at a frightening velocity. Josiah must have sensed what was coming because he kicked up his running a notch, hauling ass for the tree line at the base of the other hill. He didn't stand a chance. The thing fell on him like a bird of prey. It carried him into the sky. He let out a high-pitched scream as it carried him into the darkness. About a third of the way up, the scream cut off abruptly. A second later, Josiah's flashlight tumbled down through the sky, flipping end over end, and fell into the grass, and winked out as Lauren and I skidded to a stop. "Holy shit," I said under my breath. "What do we do?" she asked, her voice 2 octaves above its normal range. I had no idea. Being attacked by a flying insect creature was out of my experience. I didn't know if the thing was from our planet. I seriously doubted it was. Back into the trees, I said, reaching out and giving her a gentle push toward the tree line. She complied without protest as we scurried back among the trees, ducking behind the largest one we could find. Once I got up the courage, I looked back into the sky above the field and saw the powerful being cut off. That's when I noticed that Lauren still had her flashlight on. "Turn that off. We're going to stand out with that thing on." Her hand slid down the flashlight, but she was having trouble turning it off. I snatched it from her hand and snuffed out the beam by burying the front of the flashlight into my stomach. "How do I turn it off?" I asked. She reached forward, her hand shaking badly. It took her a few seconds, but she eventually found the off button and turned the flashlight off. I relinquished the flashlight to her, and she hugged it to her chest as if it were a security blanket. "What do we do now?" she asked, looking past me and into the sky above the field. Again, I didn't know. My instinct screamed at me to stay low and out of sight, but how long could we stay hidden from something that could fly and navigate like a bee? What if there was more than one? What if they could see like a thermal vision camera, like the creature from the Predator movies? With all the running we'd done, we'd stand out like Roman candles. I didn't have a lot of answers, so I went with my gut. "Let's stay here and see what happens." "Okay," she replied, but her body quivered like a scared deer, ready to bolt at any moment. My instincts kicked in and I reached out, pulling her into my body. I hugged her tightly, then said what any parent would say to a child, making a calming shushing sound. "Shh, shh, shh." Her body slowly calmed and the tremors rippling across it stopped almost completely. Having her against my body helped calm my nerves too. "How did you do that?" she whispered in my ear. "I have a kid. It's what you do." We broke the hug, and when I looked into her eyes, something passed between us, but it ended when the buzzing sound whipped overhead. We both looked to the skies, and that's when the light flashed back on, blasting down on us, feeling so much like a physical force that we both bent down. Lauren didn't scream, but she yelped. What do we do?" I grabbed her hand and pulled her through the trees, breaking out of the beam. While it wasn't locked on us at the moment, it wasn't far behind. "It's following us. I think if we stand in the trees, we'll be safe." But I was wrong. 5 seconds later, the creature burst through the treetop, breaking off limbs and showering us with leaves and twigs. It buzzed along the canopy, shining its light onto the ground, whipping it back and forth in search of us. "Run!" I yelled. I yanked her hand, pulling her along, and we were on the move, running through the trees as fast as we could, but the light was after us. The beam cut through the leaves and limbs, casting long, stark shadows across the ground. All the while, the buzzing drilled its way into my head, making it hard to even think. "It's going to get us!" Lauren nearly screamed as she pulled to a stop, killing our forward progress. "Just keep running," I said, but when I tugged her arm, she resisted. "We've got to get going. We've got to get out of the woods. We need to get home. We need to stay away from that thing," I said. That's when the light found us. It poured down on us, bleaching us out and everything around us, making Laura look like a pale ghost. A ghost scared out of its wits. The light started to descend and the buzzing amplified, nearly vibrating in my skull. I pushed forward into Laura, nearly carrying her as I headed back toward the open field. After about 10 steps, she got the message and started running again. The light continued to follow us. After half a minute, we broke out of the woods and were sprinting into the tall grass. The grass was so thick, though, it felt like we were running through waves. The creature had no impediments and was catching up to us quickly. When I looked back over my shoulder, I saw it rise into the sky like it had before it swooped down on Josiah. I felt a cold wave of panic flow over me. It must have been infectious, because Lauren started to pant and was close to hyperventilating. We were close to stopping altogether. So I grabbed Lauren's hand again and said, "We need to keep going. We can make it to the other side if we run all out right now." She looked over to me and nodded her head, lowering her chin with a renewed purpose. We surged through the grass, picking up speed. I measured the distance between us and the woods across the field, and I kept telling myself that we would be safe if we made it there. It was almost like a child's magic thinking. If. There was no guarantee it would be safe if we made it, but you have to have hope. Without it, all is lost. That's when our hope ran out. The light increased in intensity, as did the buzzing, sounding like a chainsaw in my head. We ran, but the light seemed like a supernova just behind our backs. The hairs on the back of my neck prickled out, and I tried to reach deep to gain more speed, even when I knew I was about out of gas. The light was so close then, it seemed to envelop us. Before I knew it, Lauren was lifted off the ground and she screamed, "Bill! Bill! Help me!" The thing had its insect-like pincers tearing into her shoulders. I could see blood seeping around the deep wounds on her back. I locked her hands in both of mine, yanking back, but the creature was winning the tug of war. I tried to dig in my heels, feeling my feet cutting furrows in the soft dirt beneath them as I was dragged along. This went on for nearly 20 feet. "Let her go!" I shouted, redoubling my efforts, and actually gained some ground. That's when the creature spoke, or better put, screamed. The sound made the buzzing seem pleasant. It was an unholy screech, boring into my body, feeling like a physical force, pushing against me, forcing me to the ground. For the first time, I could see the thing's face, if that's what you could call it. It had 24 eyes, but one mouth, an overlapping maw with what looked like 1,000 needle-sharp teeth as long as ice picks. A thick, viscous goo dripped off each tooth. The mouth opened and closed, then reopened as it screamed again. If the buzz had vibrated into my skull, this scream felt like 100 sharp claws drilling into my head. Then I lost my grip on Laura's hands. She flew up into the sky, her mouth open in what looked like a silent scream because it was drowned out by the creature's incessant buzzing. With each second, she got further and further away, the blackness of the sky swallowing her up. I wanted to look away, but I couldn't. For better or worse, it didn't take long as the creature flew over the woods and out of view. In truth, it was the worst. Any energy drained out of my body, and I went to my knees, the grass coming up to my chin. She was gone, and I was alone in the dark. There was no screaming or buzzing. Nothing made a noise for almost a minute. Then the crickets and the other nocturnal creatures made a brave re-entrance with their chirps and clicks. These night sounds went on for another 2 minutes, and the night was so peaceful. It was almost as if nothing had ever happened. That's when a little alarm sounded in the back of my head. The creature would return at any moment, and I needed to get moving. My arms and legs felt like they weighed 100 pounds for each limb. Moving required me to use all of my will, but I made it back to my feet. A wave of vertigo almost took me back down, but I was able to maintain my feet. But my head still felt like it was full of cobwebs. I had no idea where the damn thing was, but I was nearly certain it would be back for me. I pushed through the grass toward the stand of trees on the other side of the field, picking up speed, fueled by fear and desperation. To my surprise, I made it to the tree line and was in the woods, bounding along blindly. With both Josiah and Lauren gone, I was left without a flashlight. The moon, while bright, wasn't lighting my way. Moving too fast and near total darkness caught up with me when I lost my footing and slammed into a tree. It caught me across the midsection as I spun out of control, knocking the wind out of me. It felt like minutes before my lungs fully filled with oxygen again. All the while I laid there, I was sure that the creature was getting ready to take me. As I moved to get back to my feet again, pain racked my body. When I probed my side, it felt like someone was trying to push a crowbar through my rib cage. There was little doubt that several ribs were broken. It even hurt to breathe. As I braced myself against a tree, I felt a rumbling beneath my feet. Living in the Midwest, I have never felt an earthquake, but I could imagine that this was what one felt like. The trees shook and the leaves and small twigs rained down on me. It was a struggle to maintain my feet, so I hugged the tree. The effort wasn't pleasant as the hard bark pressed into my ribs, but it was that or fall back down. Across the clearing, a light began to glow, spreading across the trees like a mist. It grew in intensity, and the rumbling continued. The light filled the woods, creating a monochromatic panorama of white with just the silhouettes of the trees showing. The rumbling transitioned from a sensation to sound. If I thought the creature's scream was loud, this was the scream amplified to an exponential level. I slammed my hands to my ears and leaned into the tree for support. The light began to rise, spilling across the clearing, filling it, then spread into the woods. I had to squint just to withstand the intensity. It continued up into the sky, the light blotting out the darkness and flowing over the little valley I was in. The craft made it a quarter mile into the sky. Then there was the sonic boom to end all sonic booms. Exploding over the landscape, slamming down on me like the hand of God. Once again, I found myself on the ground as limbs snapped above me and fell from the treetops along with birds and other night creatures. And that was it. The spaceship, or whatever it was gone, letting the night have its way with the landscape again. My ears rang from the sonic boom, and the sounds around me seemed like they were coming to me through wet paper. My legs felt rubbery, and I had to use the tree next to me to help pull myself upright. I peered through the now diminished tree cover above me and saw only the night sky, dotted with stars, stretching out into eternity, wondering what the hell had happened. It took me nearly 2 days to hike out of the woods. I would imagine I looked like some crazed mountain man with scratches on my face and my clothes torn. For a while, I was a bit of a celebrity because I became the focus of a search party myself. Well, me, Josiah, and Lauren. Then I opened my mouth, and everyone changed their mind. I was no longer the miracle man who'd survived 2 nights in the woods. I was the crazy man who lost 2 other people in the woods under dubious circumstances. No one believed my story, and the authorities held me under suspicion for months. No hard evidence was ever unearthed to confirm their suspicions, but neither was there anything to say my side of the story was true. Whenever I was out and about, people looked at me like I was some sort of dangerous animal loose in their midst. After months, that died down, and they just looked at me out of the corner of their eye, not trusting me, but also not quite afraid of me anymore. I was an oddity, and I started to identify more and more with how Josiah must have felt, underappreciated. This feeling grew and grew. My ex-wife got a restraining order, and I was no longer able to see my own daughter. My friends made excuses not to see me or just outright ignored me, but I found a way to go on. I had to get the truth out there. Did I tell you? I started a blog.